Um, he basically wrote a series of very gross stories about fantasies that he had as an adult. One of which was read in the court as a mother-daughter fantasy of snatching, kidnapping, using ether, using to knock the victims out and then to take them to his paradise where he would get away with horrible things. Now, I going back to his upbringing, he obviously had a very tough upbringing. He was adopted. His first name was Fisher, and he was adopted by a couple along with two other boys, and he was treated very badly. There's no doubt about that. You know, he was locked in the cellar, he was beaten, he was sexually abused. He had a very difficult upbringing. There's no doubt about that. Nonetheless, it doesn't excuse the fact that from the age of 14, 15, 16, he was sexually assaulting children. The age of 17, he was in court. And on one occasion, there were two young children that he snatched. One girl he dragged into a bush, and another child who he actually followed into the garage of his own house to abuse. And one of these sexual assaults took place exactly 1 week before his trial. So knowing he was going to trial for this, for two cases, he went and did it again, third time. So this is a guy who knows no bounds, who's fearless, has always thought he can get away with it. Now, he did get a slap on the wrist that first time, but he didn't get very long inside. And although the German police clearly wanted to keep tabs on him, he was able to get out to do this mechanics course while he was serving his sentence. And before he'd actually served his sentence, he upped and left and went down to Portugal. This is one of the things that that they didn't get correct last night. He arrived in Portugal in '99 in Pradeluge and settled there around the area with a girlfriend actually at the time. And it seemed, you know, he seemed to all intents and purposes, people who knew him then, who I've spoken to, and some were in the book. And by the way, we are republishing the book. I should point that out. I've got a publisher in London who's republishing the book with a new intro, and I know there will be in a year's time, probably when the trial ever happens, there'll be a much more in-depth book. He clearly had, right from the start, criminal tendencies, and it just went from there. And I think the police catalogue 17 convictions. He's currently in prison for rape from R. Sorry, you know, I think it's really important that people know the background to this guy, and if he does ever get out, and supposedly, I don't know if you read the Mirror this morning, but I published an exclusive story along with the Olive Press about how there are some more court cases that they're throwing at him coming up in next week. In fact, one for assaulting police officers. And so they are going to be putting as much spokes in the way to prevent him getting out September the 18th. He will at least serve at least another 6 months to a year, I'm told. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, extremely brazen and dangerous, as we saw, you know, with the kid in the park. So it seems to me there was a pattern of leniency towards him and his ability to just evade justice by going to different jurisdictions. Do you think they should have been more severe on him from the get-go?
I think it's really difficult in a federal Germany because they've got, I think it's 15 or 16 different regions, and they're very standalone regions, and they all have their separate police forces. And he cleverly worked out that he could just move between these different regions, and it was very hard, therefore, for them to monitor what he was up to. And to make things even more complicated, and this was explained to me by the prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters, every time he moved to a new province or federal province, he went to Spain or Portugal in between. So he'd go to Portugal for a year or two, and then he'd go back to Germany, but a different region. So to keep tabs on him was extremely difficult. Then you've got to remember that he also spent time in certainly Eastern Europe, certainly times in Italy, time in Austria, some time in Holland, moved around. He was a drifter. So you never really knew. It's very hard to keep tabs on him. very hard. Especially with Schengen, where you can move around Europe freely, and they're not monitoring borders anymore. So he was a difficult person to keep tabs on, and I think it's fair to say the Portuguese police, quite frankly, didn't give a stuff. And I think it's the slow realization is coming that they may have to face the truth that they allowed a very dangerous sex offender and potentially, shall I say, serial K. I don't know if you're allowed to say that or whatever, but could have been someone who killed a number of people in their borders and didn't monitor him properly. So I do think it would be, they should have monitored him more closely if they could, but it was very difficult.
So was it the lack of enthusiasm for the police force to go after these people that caused PDFs to gravitate towards Portugal during that era?
Yeah, I think it was seen as the perfect place to go, where the police really weren't interested in that as a crime. I mean, I think in my book, I think I wrote that in 2008, after Maddie went missing, you could be sitting in a cafe in a village somewhere in Portugal with your laptop open, watching child's pee, and you couldn't be caught for that, watching it, and so it was very lax. And of course, Port Spain, which had been the Wild West when we arrived here in sort of early 2000s, had been pretty wild, and a lot of stuff. The police really started cracking down in Spain, and of course, a lot of these kind of travellers and people who are up to no good moved across the border to Portugal, because there the police force was worse paid than Spain. They had less policemen. It was just as rugged and hidden, and he was able to sort of, these sort of new age traveller societies, these kind of van lifer types. He was able to drift in and out of these communities, basically selling drugs and doing odd jobs. There were times when he would settle down a bit with a girlfriend, and we now know he rented this house for, let's have a look, for 7 years. He lived just outside Pradeluge, in this little house and of course he desperately didn't want anyone to find it. So when he was arrested, he gave different addresses, said he was living in his van. But he could blend into the community there and find like-minded people who wanted to do the same things as he wanted to do, which was, PDFs.
How was he able to sustain himself, and how did he purchase the creepy structure, the property that they showed us, where the swimming costumes are found of the kids?
Well, that's interesting. That was we saw that last night, and that's something new that came out. I mean, I don't know what your take was on the documentary. I felt like the narrative was generally good. It tried to explain as best as possible why the police think this guy's guilty. I can tell you now, there's a lot more that didn't go in that documentary. Stuff that they did know, but they couldn't put in, and stuff they didn't know. But I think what's particularly interesting was some of the photographic and video evidence that we saw from the box factory that he owned in New Wiegersleben, which was the converted box factory in East Germany. He bought in 2008 for 22,000, I think it was. And he wanted to sort of turn that into a kind of sculpture garden, creative art project, or whatever it was. But that's where he effectively stored, I think at one point, nearly 20 vehicles, which the police, by the way, took lots of them, a lot more than people realize, off the land, and obviously scoured for DNA and whatnot. But in the photos we saw last night for the first time, we saw the burial site where he buried his dog, Charlie. And underneath the body of Charlie was this plastic Aldi bag, Lidl bag, full of stuff that he'd hidden. And I think we saw for the first time a photograph of the 6 USB sticks and 2 memory sticks were on there. There were lots of photos and stuff that he shared, and his fantasies, and even an autobiography that he was writing. And of course, you also saw the 75 children's swimming costumes. A lot of them were in his Winnebago. You also saw the children's bikes, little toys. I mean, I've been around that place 3 times now, and there's still lots of evidence of bits and bobs they hadn't taken. And I do believe there's, that's some of it there. I do believe there's a lot of a lot more stuff there that they possibly didn't find. I'm told they did find it because they spent, not only did they spend 3 days there initially, the 2016, they went back again, the BK Bundeskriminalamt in Wiesbaden, who were running the investigation. They went back and had a very, very good look at it again. Obviously, they tell me they properly scoured all the tunnels underground, and this was somewhere that Brueckner loved. It was his fantasy, you know, these underground tunnels, this sort of former, what I believe could have been some sort of concentration camp. And I think that, you know, he loved the fact that he could store all his cars there. And I'm pretty sure that some pretty nasty things happened there. People who went there, visited, said that it had a very sinister atmosphere when he was there. And it's clearly, you know, the money he got from that, interestingly, came from a robbery, a burglary of a house where he took 100,000 euros. And he was a very prolific burglar, so he was often taking. There's the mask, you see. Now that's the mask that they found, but also there are photographs we've seen for the first time where he put on Photoshop some masks onto him naked when he was standing by the Irade Lake, where of course the police searched, if you remember, 2 years ago in Portugal. And some of these photos where he's naked and often he has an erect member, very odd photos that he took. I don't know, I think he took a lot of himself, but I don't know who took them. That's a fascinating idea to know who might have taken them, actually. But in these pictures, he's actually mapped up a black balaclava onto his face to show what he would look like if he was, say, attacking a victim. And of course, we know that he attacked various victims. He's in prison now for 7 years for the R of a very old, unfortunately now passed away pensioner, American pensioner, and he wore a mask like the one we just seen. And that mask also was the one he wore when Hazel Behan was raped as well. And she's convinced that she saw him. You heard in court, she went to court bravely, gave her evidence. She's absolutely certain, and I believe, completely believe her, that that he's the man who raped her. His piercing blue eyes. She also saw on his leg a mark, which has now come out and been proven to be the case. But yet, for some reason, the judge in that case decided there was no mark and there was no reason to look at the marks or photos. Again, at the box factory, they found a suitcase, which I don't know if you've seen that picture. There was a suitcase, and in that suitcase was very weirdly, according to Rob's testimony last night, he said there were lots of photographs of children, girls, I think mostly, and oddly some phone numbers, a great bunch of phone numbers. They didn't say. I don't think Rob knows who they, and in fact, I don't think he's got phone numbers, but the police obviously have those phone numbers. I don't know if they're for mothers of children, or I don't know, or for paedophile or PDFs or whatever it is. You know, I don't know if they're. Again, this is something that I'll be exploring more over the coming year or two, and I do think this case isn't going to be closed anytime soon, Shaun. But I do think we're coming towards the end game.
Could you explain the significance then of the insurance document?
Yeah, that's right. Well done for getting all this stuff, by the way. So yeah, this is interesting. This is very interesting. So this is something that I do know about. It's not in my book, but it will be in the next one. And this links to, you may have read that in my first book, I published that he attended the so-called Dragon Festival in Orcava, which is in the Alpujarras Mountains of Granada, not far from the Costa del Sol. And this festival is where basically, effectively, the world's New Age travelers go and party for what used to be about 2 weeks. You know, they'd arrive a week before and then they wouldn't leave for a week afterwards. And the police just didn't know what to do, so they just sort of let them stay there. And if you see the photographs of this event, it's staggering, because it's sort of, as far as the eye can see, wall-to-wall caravans and Winnebagos. I mean, it looks like a sort of gypsy festival, like the Apple, what's it called? What's that fair they have in England where they all go, the horse fair, Appledore horse fair, whatever it is, but for kind of New Age travelers. And everyone had a sound system, and they were pumping out sound all the way through the night, till 6, 7, 8 in the morning. I remember Chris Stewart, who lived up there, who's driving over lemons, the Genesis drummer, said all he would hear for like 3 days or 4 days was just bang, bang, bang. Anyway, Christian loved going to this festival and went certainly in 2007 and 2008. And this document here, and of course, what's interesting is one of the witnesses in the case, Helga Bushing, who knew Brueckner very well. Helga, bless him, said he's now unfortunately not very well, living in Italy, but he's a decent, really decent guy. And I mean, that's all relative because he's been in prison lots of times for theft and drugs. So I don't know how decent he is, but anyway, the point is, I believe him when he said that Christian confessed to him that he took Maddie from the apartment, and he told Helga Bushing at this festival, the Dragon Festival in 2008, March. They said last night, April, it was March, in fact, that she had not screamed when she was taken out the apartment. And Helga clearly saw that as a confession. And Brueckner, having realized he'd told Helga this, the look of horror on his face, he immediately kind of freaked out and walked off. And what Helga said in the court actually recently, and we'll say again in the Maddie case when it comes to court, was that he, in the middle of the night, got up and left and vanished, took his Winnebago and off he went. And so that document you had up there, I'll just quickly explain it, proves that, and he denied he was there, but proves that he was actually at this festival. So at least it backs up Helga's claims. The document shows that his Winnebago was in an accident with a Porsche, a local Spanish-driven Porsche by a woman in a petrol station just coming out in Orkava at the time. And it's got Brueckner's signature on it. He's confirmed it. He nudged another car. I think he took off the wing mirror. Certainly scratched the door. I'll have to check my notes, but definitely that happened at the time of the Dragon Festival. So he was 100% there. And again, I know because we found evidence we think was in his van and him at the year before. So that was just in the run-up to Maddie going missing, being snatched. He was there again because he was traveling around a lot with this Winnebago VW van, and he took it even though the owners didn't want him to. He took it to the festival. So he was a regular there with all these people.
All right, viewers, I am here with John Clark, and he's the author of a book that's absolutely terrified me. Don't read it late at night. It is harrowing, about Christian B. And the link for that book is in the description box, as is John's website. So if you've just joined us, I'm going to do a quick poll. Put a 1 in the chat, viewers, if you managed to watch the Channel 4 documentary that was released last night about Madeleine McCann and Christian B. Put a 2 in the chat if you've not yet managed to watch it, just so we can get an idea of how many of you saw it. Me and Jen were up till midnight watching it. John, is it also the case that one of his vehicles had a compartment in it that you could hide a child in?
Very much so. I believe it wasn't just one. I believe it was a number of vehicles that were adapted to carry not just potentially children, but drugs, primarily moving drugs around across borders. Let's not forget that moving from Portugal to Germany and back, he would be going across various borders, and you could, of course, be picked up at any time on a border. So he had to have these compartments. But in particular, he had this one Winnebago, and there was a fascinating chat I had with the father of one of his girlfriends, a woman called Nicole Fellinger, who he was sort of living with on and off. Not long after, well, actually, he met her before Maddie went missing. At Christmas 2006, he had a leaving party from prison, and I don't know whether anything they certainly struck up a good friendship. Whether anything actually happened sexually, I couldn't say, but they certainly got a very special relationship. Around the time that Maddie went missing, certainly she'd separated from her partner Matthias, and Christian was sort of moving in on her, and they became very close. It's fairly well documented that while she was there, Christian often turned up in the house where she was obviously living with orphans. She was looking after these orphans from Germany, these poor kids that were brought in who were 13, 14, 15, who had been abused, most of them, or certainly, if not sexually, certainly physically abused, and had difficult upbringings. And of course, they were living in her house, this rather creepy house that she was renting in the hills, about 45 minutes inland from the Algarve. And of course, Christian, you know, this is his paradise, isn't it? You know,